48-year-old Dorothy H. Miller worked for Buziak Realty in Burlington, Iowa, the only female realtor in town. On August 15th of 1969, Dorothy Miller received a phone call from a man calling himself Robert Clark and requesting a tour of an available property on Grand Street later that night. Dorothy, wary of showing houses to strangers after dark, agreed to the appointment but took her husband Fred along for safety. Dorothy and Fred picked up Robert Clark at the spot he had specified, a pharmacy near the Maple Leaf Tavern. Once in the vehicle, Clark claimed that he was moving his family to Burlington from Des Moines, though he would not give any concrete details about what he did for a living. Fred Miller later described the man as a good-looking fellow in his 20s, of about average height and weight, with short dark hair and a clean-cut appearance. The purported client had a look around the house, after which the Millers dropped him back off near the pharmacy and proceeded back home. On the following day, the man called Dorothy back and told her that he wanted to return to the property so he could take some pictures to show his wife, who was presumably still back in Des Moines. Dorothy already had another client scheduled for that evening, but told Clark that she would be happy to meet him on Monday, August 18th. Clark agreed and told her to call him at the Maple Leaf Tavern when she was ready to pick him up. On Monday, between 7 and 7:30 p.m., Dorothy called the Maple Leaf, and shortly afterward, patrons of the tavern spotted Robert Clark leaving the establishment and getting into Dorothy's car. Likewise, residents of Grand Street near the vacant home saw Dorothy Miller and Robert Clark arriving at the empty property at approximately 8 p.m. Meanwhile, back at the Miller household, Fred went to bed only half an hour after his wife was last seen. He worked as a truck driver and had to get up very early in the morning. Upon being awakened by his alarm clock at 5 a.m. on the morning of Tuesday, August 19th, he became concerned when he saw that Dorothy had never come home. He first called the couple's adult daughter, Patricia, who drove to her parents' house and accompanied her father to the spot near the Maple Leaf where Dorothy had been scheduled to pick up her client, Robert Clark. Fred and Patricia didn't find Dorothy, but they did find Dorothy's vehicle parked near the pharmacy with the keys still in the ignition and an unused camera flash cube on the front seat. Fearing the worst, Fred Miller contacted the authorities. The police immediately headed for the vacant Grand Street house, and after a brief search, discovered the body of Dorothy Miller in a closet in an upstairs bedroom. She was lying face down, her hands had been bound in front of her, and her clothing had been ripped off and pushed askew. She had been raped and stabbed nearly 24 times. She also had wounds on her head that suggested her killer had come up behind her and knocked her unconscious prior to the sexual assault. Detectives launched an all-out hunt for Robert Clark, disseminating a composite sketch of the man and a description of his vehicle, a dull black pickup truck, to the media, in the hopes that someone knew who he was and where he had gone after the crime. A large reward was also offered for information leading to an arrest. Police conducted over 200 interviews with residents of Grand Street, patrons of the Maple Leaf Tavern, as well as friends and family members of Dorothy Miller. The case was complicated immensely by the fact that Robert Clark was obviously not the killer's real name, and none of the details he had given to the Millers about his life were accurate, so detectives were having a difficult time identifying him and determining where he had come from. Even more disturbingly, an examination of the crime scene from a psychological profiling standpoint suggested that the murderer was likely a psychopath who may well have killed before. The fact that he had seemingly planned the crime over the course of a few days, and had likely staked out the vacant home beforehand in order to ensure a means of ingress, as well as the best way to maximize the house's layout during his attack, was indicative of an organized and ruthless individual, who was nonetheless perfectly capable of appearing normal. The homicide of Dorothy Miller has since grown cold. "29-year-old Mary Ann Plett was a real estate agent at Graham Realty Limited in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and was married with 2 children. On September 15, 1971, she took a client out to look at acreage outside of Edmonton. The man was in his 40s, had a low, rough voice, and gave his name as James Cooper. He told Mary Ann that he worked in Winnipeg, but was interested in buying property around Edmonton. Mary Ann Plett never returned from her appointment with James Cooper. Though the area of the prospective property was searched, no trace of her was found, and police had no luck locating the mysterious James Cooper either. 2 days after Mary Ann vanished, authorities found her abandoned vehicle in a used car lot. It was locked, and inside officers found 2 small bloodstains and a crumpled wig that had belonged to Mary Ann. Of the woman herself, however, there was still no sign. Searches for her had to be called off for the winter, though a hunter found her briefcase in the woods off a lumber road about 100 miles from where she had disappeared. More of her things, including a hair curler, some of her real estate papers, and a can opener, were found stashed underneath a log about 2.5 miles from where the briefcase was discovered. Once the spring thaw began, the search started up again. On April 14th, 2 workers digging a drainage ditch found Mary Ann's clothing discarded, and 5 days after that, her skull and several more of her bones were recovered by police dogs, not far from the site where her briefcase had been dumped. Because her body was skeletonized, an autopsy revealed nothing about her cause of death. Investigators interviewed several suspects, including a man who was believed to be connected to the murders of several other Alberta women. There was also speculation that Mary Ann had been the victim of a possible serial killer, thought to be responsible for the slayings of 7 hitchhikers. The man who called himself James Cooper was, of course, also a person of interest, as he was the last known person to have seen Mary Ann Plett alive, and very well might have killed her. This individual, unfortunately, has never been identified. In a tragic coda to the case, Mary Ann's husband, Jake, who remarried after his first wife's death, was killed in a plane crash along with his second wife in 1978. The Mary Ann Plett case remains unsolved. Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak was a 24-year-old real estate agent working in Saanich, a suburb of Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Known for her ambition, charm, and intelligence, Lindsay was quickly making a name for herself in the real estate industry. At the time of her death, she was in a serious relationship with Jason Zalo, the son of a wealthy and successful real estate family and a fellow agent. In late January 2008, Lindsay received a call from a woman with a strong foreign accent who claimed to be looking for $1 million home in the Victoria area. The caller mentioned a tight time frame, stating she and her husband were moving to town quickly and needed to make a purchase soon. Lindsay found the request suspicious, both because of the unusual accent, which she believed was fake, and the fact that the woman said she got Lindsay's number from a former client, whose name Lindsay didn't recognize. Despite her concerns, Lindsay's boyfriend Jason encouraged her to meet the woman for a private showing, telling Lindsay it would likely lead to a substantial commission. On the afternoon of February 2, 2008, Lindsay had arranged to show a newly built home on D'Souza Place in the upscale neighborhood of Gordon Head. The house was vacant and staged, ideal for a walkthrough. Because of her unease with the situation, Lindsay asked her boyfriend Jason to be nearby for support. Lindsay and Jason ate at a restaurant together before the appointment, leaving the establishment at 4:24 p.m. Lindsay then went home in her own car to change her clothes, while Jason took his vehicle to a nearby auto repair shop to pick up a work colleague. Jason was running late, but he texted Lindsay several times to let her know he was on his way. According to reports, Lindsay met the couple at the property at around 5:30 p.m. Witnesses saw a man and woman, both dressed in business attire, approach the house. The man was white with dark hair and stood about 6 feet tall. The woman was blonde and wore a distinctive patterned dress. About 10 minutes after Lindsay entered the home with them, Jason Zalo and his colleague arrived outside the house. They waited for a short time, then Jason texted Lindsay, but received no response. Eventually, they approached the front door and found it locked. Looking through the windows, they saw Lindsay's shoes inside, but no sign of movement. Jason and his colleague went around to the back of the house and found the patio door wide open. Jason called 911 to tell them that he and his friend were entering the house and to come right away because something was clearly very wrong. Jason and his colleague eventually found Lindsay's body upstairs in the master bedroom, lying face down in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed multiple times, and the scene showed no signs of robbery or sexual assault. It was also clear that the killer or killers had surprised Lindsay, probably attacking her from behind, as she bore no defensive wounds. The nature of the attack suggested a targeted, personal killing. The Saanich Police Department launched an extensive investigation, supported by outside agencies, but despite their efforts, the case stagnated, with no arrests made. Detectives believe the murder was not a random act, and was likely organized by more than one person. The woman who called Lindsay used a burner phone purchased under a fake name, which was activated and deactivated within a short period, making it difficult to track. Several theories about the mysterious crime have emerged over the years. Due to the calculated nature of the murder, for example, many believe Lindsay was the victim of a professional hit. The killers managed to leave no forensic evidence, the house was wiped of fingerprints, and the phone used to lure her was untraceable. Some speculation has also connected the crime to Lindsay's past social circle, including individuals involved in drug trafficking. In late 2007, Lindsay had reportedly contacted a friend in law enforcement about witnessing something she shouldn't have seen, though the details of that conversation remain unclear. Still others speculate that someone with a personal grudge against Lindsay orchestrated the murder. Her boyfriend, Jason Zalo, was extensively investigated and cleared by police, as CCTV footage showed he was still at the automotive shop at the time of the slaying. He also easily passed a polygraph test. Members of Zalo's family were also scrutinized, as they had ties to the neighborhood where Lindsay was killed, but police have stated that none of Jason's relatives are considered suspects either. It's also been hypothesized that someone familiar with Lindsay's work, perhaps a colleague, may have perpetrated the crime for some unknown motive. The case has drawn widespread media coverage, including episodes on shows such as Dateline NBC, 2020, and Crime Watch Daily. Lindsay's father, Jeff Buziak, has been one of the most vocal advocates for justice. He maintains a public campaign to keep his daughter's case in the spotlight, including maintaining a website and organizing annual walks for justice in Victoria. In 2021, Saanich Police said they had made progress using advanced DNA analysis and were working with the FBI, but no arrests have been announced as of 2025. Investigators still believe someone in the community knows the truth and have renewed appeals for information.